Hi, hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. This is Reads with Lauren. I'm Lauren, and this is part 2 of a 3-part series. I made the decision to go through the last 10 years of my books that I've read and list any series that I have started in order to be able to decide if I will continue with the series or if I will not be continuing. So the reason I've broken this down into 3 parts is because there were so many books and it was really hard to try and compile this into one video. I just thought there's just no way. I think I ended up with 67 series that I've started in the last 10 years. And yeah, that would have just been hours. We don't need that. But today I wanted to have a chat with you about the book series that I've started and I potentially will revisit again, but I'm not sure. I have done a series about the books that I'm definitely going to continue, the series that I am dying to continue. So that is an earlier video. Please check that out if you haven't already. But let's have a chat today about some of the book series that I have started since 2014 that I have every intention of potentially looking on again in the future. So let's start with one that is a absolute classic. It's a well-loved fantasy series, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. Now, I have watched the entirety of Game of Thrones, and I thoroughly enjoyed the series, but was bitterly disappointed, just like most others, by the pacing and just the ending of the series. So I didn't think that I was going to go back to these books. I read the first 2 in 2014, but back then I wasn't really much of a fantasy reader yet, so I struggled with the characters. I struggled with trying to remember who everyone was and what was happening, because there is so much going on in that fantasy series. But yeah, I would really love to delve back into it now that I am a bit more of a seasoned fantasy reader and see if it's something that I will enjoy, because I do thoroughly enjoy the storyline from Game of Thrones, and I vaguely have a small amount of hope that potentially the books will be much better and that George R.R. Martin will eventually give us the ending that we need and deserve. So yeah, that is one on the radar that I would really like to look back on and potentially reread, but it's not a high priority on my list. Then in 2015, I vaguely decided to get back into V.C. Andrews. So I read a lot of V.C. Andrews when I was younger, and, started with Flowers in the Attic, which, as you do. And those themes in those books are so problematic. But back in 2015, I decided, no, I'm going to reread them all. So I picked up a lot of different copies of the books, and I ended up starting the Castile series. So that started with Heaven, which when I looked at it, it was classed as horror and YA, and I can understand the horror aspect for sure, because yeah, these books, V.C. Andrews had a twisted mind, and I can't believe that with the themes that they had, that I enjoyed them so thoroughly. I ended up only reading the first 3 in the Heaven series, and I didn't continue to buy them, and I ended up getting rid of the ones that I had, and I'm not sure if they're books that I will look back on, but I have such fond memories of reading them, even though they are so problematic and the themes are just so twisted. So yeah, I would be interested to revisit them one day, but there's also so many amazing books out there that I do want to read, so it's not high on my priority list. But yeah, something that I do think about from time to time, and I'm like, should I retry them and see if they're as good as I remember? Because, I mean, if I didn't keep them all, the ones that I purchased, then obviously I didn't think that they were as good as I remember. But, it's been a while, and I do think about them from time to time. So we'll see. Then we jump pretty quickly into 2021. So between 2015 and 2021, I must have read a lot of series all the way through, which is really good. But the series that I started in 2021 is the Roots of Chaos series by Samantha Shannon. So I originally picked up Priory of the Orange Tree because of the fact that it was a standalone fantasy with sapphic themes and dragons. So, you know, I was like, yes, I must. And look, it was okay. I didn't mind it. I enjoyed it. But in saying that, I haven't been urgently wanting to pick up A Day of Fallen Night, which is the prequel that has since been released. There is also on Goodreads a note to state that another book is coming out set after the Priory of the Orange Tree. So I don't know. It's on the radar. It's a potential. I don't remember, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, I can kind of remember some of the characters and the stories that occur, but it's not something that I go back to and think about a lot. So I don't know. Well, yeah. I mean, the covers are exquisite. So A Day of Fallen Night, look at this. Look at this fucking cover. Like, it's beautiful. So yeah, the covers are divine. And so it's something that I may potentially look at reading. But yeah, not high on the priority list. Then in 2021, I read 4 of the 16 primary works of Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. I'm not a huge middle grade reader, and it became evident around this time that that was the case. I did have a lot of fun with these 4 books, but I don't think that they are a series that I would continue on my own. However, in saying that, I have been trying desperately to get my kids to read these series. The older 2 are not interested. They are like a manga only type of team. They do not want to read anything I recommend, but I have many hopes for my 7-year-old. He is really into like Pokemon and dinosaurs and stuff, and I'm just kind of hoping that that progresses into this kind of theme, because the Skullduggery Pleasant books are great and I did have a lot of fun with them, and I feel like if I had the reasoning behind it of enjoying them with my son, then it's something that I would definitely prioritize. But at this point, reading them for my own self-enjoyment and for no other reason makes them a little bit lower on the priority list. But they're definitely ones that I would like to look back onto at some point, and I do hope with desperation that my 7-year-old is into them, because they are fun and I think that they would be something that we would enjoy reading together. Then we move on to 2022, and this was when I really ventured into the mangas, because my kids are so obsessed with mangas and I was trying to recommend them books. So I thought if I read the books that they really enjoyed, then I'd be able to give them book recommendations that they'd hopefully be able to progress into. Not having a lot of success with that, but you know, maybe one day. But in this manga sort of season, I picked up the first My Hero Academia book. My eldest has most of these books, and so I thought it would be cool to be able to read almost a full series in one hit. However, I wasn't hooked. I wasn't as hooked as I thought I'd be, so I haven't continued. But, you know, they're sitting there and I could decide to turn around and pick them up again, give them another go. They're definitely something that, you know, I don't think, no interest whatsoever. But yeah, not a high priority. So this book series centers on Izuku. Izuku wants to be one of the 80% in the world that end up getting superpowers or quirks. But he's part of the 20%. He doesn't have any powers. So he ends up meeting All Might, who is the greatest hero of all time. And All Might gives him an opportunity to change his destiny. So it sounds really cool. It sounds like a great story. I just didn't find it as enthralling as I thought it was going to be. But I mean, I am considering having another look at them one day in the future, especially because I like One Piece so much and it's kind of got the same sort of vibes. You know, generally I go for like Death Note, Monster, the manga series that are very dramatic and very, you know, lots of plot twists and all of that, not the like real just fun stories, but it's definitely on the radar. I would like to give it another go and see what I think, but yeah, just not in the foreseeable future. So around the same time, I also picked up the Hollow Field series by Madeline Roska. So this is another series that I picked up for the kids. They loved it, so I gave it a go. We have the second book, but we don't have the first book. I borrowed that from the library. However, it centers on Lucy, and she's a young girl that gets thrown into this mad scientist school for, evil geniuses. And she doesn't quite have these skills, but she needs to pick them up quickly because at the end of every week, the person who has the lowest scores ends up having to go to this windmill for detention and never return. It was very interesting. I've read book 1 and 2. There is only one more out. I did see that there's a spin-off series, so that could be something to venture into eventually. But same sort of deal. It's more centered on, it's more of a middle grade sort of read, and it just doesn't quite work for me for my own enjoyment and for no other reason. But I think that, if I went to reread them, or if I bought the third one for the kids, then I would end up looking at them again. And the next is the Pies Before Guys mystery series. I read Magic, Lies and Deadly Pies by Misha Pop. And look, I really enjoyed it. It was a cute murder mystery sort of thing. It kind of had that vengeful vibes, which works for me. The series centers on Daisy, and Daisy is a baker that makes pies that have a secret ingredient, and that ingredient is the ability to avenge women done wrong by men. So they were the first one was really fun. I did have a great time with it. I didn't realize that there are 2 more in the series. So as I was looking it up, it was really interesting to see. And I am intrigued. I'm intrigued to keep reading about Daisy. She was a great character. She was a lot of fun. That's one that I am potentially going to continue, but it's not high priority at this point. I reattempted to read, so back in 2022, I reread all of my Cassandra Clare books. They were an absolute favorite of mine when I was a teenager. I was absolutely obsessed. I still really enjoyed them. So when I finished rereading all of those books, I made the decision to reattempt another book series that I really loved as a kid or as a teenager, and that was the Evernight series by Claudia Gray. I just remember the first time I read these, the first book absolutely floored me. There is a twist in it at the beginning that I had no idea. It blew my mind. So I just remember being really into these books when I was a teenager. So I attempted rereading them, and I started with Evernight, and I just found it being a grown-up now. Really hard. Really hard to read because it's insta-lovey, it's teenage drama and angst, and kind of just really codependent. And I struggle with that now. So I only managed to read the first one. However, I do want to reread this series because I loved these series so much. I was gifted with these many years ago and I haven't read them. But they are sort of a spin-off. It's Balthazar, which is a spin-off book about one of the characters in the Evernight series, and Balthazar was a favorite character of mine, so I would love to read this one eventually. But in saying that, I don't remember a lot of the series, so it does mean I'll have to push myself through the reread of the rest. And then there is another book that is by Claudia Gray, and I actually do really enjoy Claudia Gray's work. I finished the Firebird series not long ago, and that was one that I will revisit. It was really great. It was interdimensional travel, so something that I thoroughly enjoy. So I do really want to read Fateful as well, and that is part of the reason that I was prompted to reread the Evernight series. This story centers on characters on Titanic, so I don't know how that will go. However, it's one that, yes, I do want to read eventually. And the only reason it's on the maybe list is because I just struggled with Evernight so hard, and putting myself through the other 3, knowing that they are all centered around this relationship that's just so codependent. I just can't deal with that anymore. It's like Twilight. I loved Twilight when that came out, and now I just want to hurt it. So yeah, bit of a struggle, but I will eventually get around to reading these again. Then I started, and I've read half of this series. So there is 8, and I've read 4, and that is the Throne for Sisters series by Morgan Rice. Morgan Rice has a lot of books out. She has released a lot of books. They are quite short, quite punchy. So this series, even though it's not really one that is an all-time favorite that I'm desperate to continue, is one that I know is a really good sort of in-between book when I just need a bit of a change of pace and I just need a punchy, fast story that just tells me what's happening. They're definitely not fun. They are quite traumatic. There's a lot of stuff occurs to these characters, which is quite tough. But they're good. They're good. They are, like I said, they're not my favorite, but I would like to continue eventually. And it's a YA fantasy about two sisters who leave this orphanage that they've been raised in, and they end up being separated and going on these two different journeys. However, they actually can read each other's minds. They have this magical power, and they eventually discover that they are more than what they think. Like, they were put in this orphanage for a reason. You don't necessarily get the happy ending that you think you're going to get. And that's something that I do enjoy about Morgan's work. And so I would eventually like to finish this series and venture into some of her other books, just because, yeah, they're just a nice, easy, pack-a-punch sort of story where you can just sort of read it in one sitting and get what you need from it, and then just be able to, I don't know, not have to utilize your brain too much. 2023, I decided to start doing sort of challenges for myself. Now, this was before YouTube. So this year there was a lot of book series that I started that I had and I hadn't, I'd put off reading. I'd had for years and haven't read yet. So there are a lot of series here that I might continue, and there's way more in the I will not be continuing, just because, I literally pulled the name out of a TBR jar. So it wasn't like I need to read this. It was okay, am I going to keep this or am I going to get rid of it? I started with the 20-Sided Sorceress series by Annie Bellett. So this was an audiobook, and it's an urban fantasy about this character named Jade. She is a sorceress who currently runs a comic book and game store, after escaping a sorcerer who wants to take her powers by essentially eating her heart. So she's sort of taken herself away from all of this world, but she is thrown back into it by this shapeshifter who is, of course, sexy as hell. So I read book 1. There is 10, but it was okay. Like, it's a series where I'm like, I might continue that. I could continue that. I mean, it's like if the option was given to me, if book 2 was given to me, like, here you go, let's check this out, I would read it. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. So it was an iffy one, but I thought, no, I'll chuck it in the might read, because it was good enough for me to enjoy, and I'm sure that if I continued, I would be okay with it. It would be fine. But yeah, definitely not like a favorite series of mine. Then another audio that I decided to pick up is the first book in the Don Tillman series. So the first book is called The Rosie Project, and this book was a freebie on Audible, and it was an experience. It was an experience reading this book. It's quite clear that Don Tillman has very, very much, he's got social anxiety, social issues. I think that there is definitely some autistic traits in there. So he is very black or white. There's sort of no gray. He ends up on this pursuit for love. So he creates the wife project, and he has very specific desires for what he requires from a wife. And it is quite funny, and obviously the person that he meets is not going to tick every box, and it kind of is his delving out into socializing and coming out of his shell a little bit more. And I certainly enjoyed it, but I didn't realize that there was 2 books afterwards, and they're kind of ones where, same sort of situation, if the opportunity arises where it is there, it is available, and I can just pick it up and read it, I might continue with this series. However, it's definitely not a high priority. I found that some of the scenes were really uncomfortable. Don is a very awkward character, so it was a struggle to follow him along on the journey. And but you know, it's also understandable in a sense. It is a good exploration in having to compromise and, you know, not seeking perfection, because that just doesn't exist. But yeah, it was an interesting book, and I could potentially continue with the series if I felt so inclined. Another reread of a series. So when I was younger, in my early 20s, I really loved Marion Kay's work, and so I had read the Welsh Family series, and I classed it as one of my favorite series. That was sort of the genre that I was really into in my early 20s, and I started to reread it recently because I picked up a couple more of her work, some of her more recent stuff, and I've got a couple of her more recent books on the Kindle. Let's just say I really, really hope that the more recent books do not have the same sort of writing style, because I can't believe that I loved books so much that had such despicable characters, and the amount of fat shaming in these books. It's no wonder I had so much body dysmorphia issues when I was younger, because if I was reading books like this and enjoying it, yeah, I definitely didn't have a positive view on my body at that point in time, let's just say. So I'm hoping that the more recent books will be better than that. And I definitely want to continue rereading the series in the hopes that they continue to improve as time goes by, because I know that a lot of romance books written in the 90s sort of were that same theme, because I read a lot of them when I was younger, and yeah, it's just a theme that doesn't necessarily work for me anymore, but I'm hoping that her newer stuff is better. Then I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I hope that I've pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I haven't. So I read the first 2 volumes of this in the book part 1. I borrowed it from the library. It's a graphic novel series about the author's life in Tehran in Iran. So I read the first volume, which is the books 1 and 2, and that centers on her childhood. Books 3 and 4, or part 2, centers on her adulthood and moving away from Iran and sort of acclimatizing to the changes. I'm not actively searching for part 2 of the book. I didn't mind the graphic novel, but I didn't think that I wasn't a huge fan of the graphics style, the way that it was drawn. So, I mean, I'd love to continue the series and learn a little bit more about her experiences, but it's not one that I'm actively seeking at the moment. Then we've got some more manga. This is definitely a period of trying to relate to my kids and find something that, you know, would bring them into the actual reading book space. Well, but it's actually just brought me more into the manga area, which is fine. But I picked up the first in the Baymax series by Haruki Ueno. I hope that I'm saying that right. This is the manga that, you know, has been used to create Big Hero 6. I love that show. I love that movie. It's such a good movie. And I just really, really wanted to check it out. However, I know that the manga goes off in a completely different direction. So I enjoyed the first one. It wasn't too bad, but I'm not sure if I'll continue, because I just don't want to ruin how the movie made me feel, and knowing that one of the characters actually has a completely different storyline in the series makes me sad. So I'm not sure if I want to put myself through that. But the first manga was really, really good, and yeah, it's on the radar. If I find volume 2, I'll pick it up and I'll give it a go. Then the last 2 that I have attempted this year, that I may continue if the kids decide to pick up the rest of them, but it's not a huge priority for me particularly, and that is Komi Can't Communicate by Tomohito Oda. The same sort of situation. It's funny, it's cute, it's okay, but it doesn't really have sort of the plot that draws me in like other mangas do. So if the kids decide to continue to purchase this series, I will continue, but it's not a priority. I also picked up for my 10-year-old My New Life as a Cat by Konomi Wagata. This was cute. It was really funny. It centers on this boy who is in an accident and he wakes up in the body of a cat. And so he is on this adventure to try and get back to his body, but all he wants to do is sleep. He ends up being picked up by another student at his school who he ends up falling in love with. And she falls in love with him and he ends up being her cat. So it's sort of like a middle grade rom-com sort of situation, and it's super cute. And like I said, as before, if the kids continue to buy this series, I might check out the rest of it, but it's definitely not high priority. But that's it. That's all the book series that I have started in the last 10 years that I may continue. But please let me know in the comments if you have read any of these series, if you think they are worth continuing, or if it's just worth leaving them behind. And if there's any series that you have recently started that you're unsure about continuing, please let me know in the comments. Stay tuned for volume 3 because the next one is going to be a harsh one because it's all of the book series that I've started but have no desire to continue. So stay tuned, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you very soon for another video. Goodbye, my darlings.